I want to tell you about a morning that I keep going back to in my mind. 4:30 in the morning, still dark. The streets of Luang Prabang completely empty. I walked to the main road and sat on a low wall and waited. At 5 they came, dozens of monks in saffron robes moving in single file through the mist, completely silent. No conversation, no phones, just the soft sound of bare feet on stone and the gentle rhythm of the procession moving through a city that had not yet woken up. Local women knelt on the pavement offering sticky rice from woven baskets. The monks accepted without stopping, without speaking, without breaking the silence that surrounded the whole thing like a held breath. I sat there for 40 minutes without moving. I have traveled across Southeast Asia for years. I've seen temples and ceremonies and cultural performances of every kind. I have never experienced anything quite like that morning in Luang Prabang. And that is exactly why I need to tell you something important about this city. It is changing, faster than most people realize. And the morning I just described, that silence, that authenticity, that feeling of witnessing something real rather than something performed, is becoming harder to find with every passing year. This video is about what Luang Prabang is right now, the most peaceful city I have visited in Southeast Asia, and about why the window to experience it this way is closing. Go before it is gone. Let me tell you where Luang Prabang is and why it matters. Northern Laos, where the Mekong River meets the Nam Khan, surrounded by mountains that catch the morning mist and hold it until mid-morning. A city of temples, over 30 Buddhist Wats in an area you can walk across in 20 minutes. It was the royal capital of the Kingdom of Lanshang for centuries, then a French colonial outpost, then forgotten by the world during decades of war and isolation, then rediscovered. UNESCO named it a World Heritage Site in 1995. The citation described it as a unique, remarkably well-preserved townscape. That phrase, remarkably well-preserved, tells you everything about what makes Luang Prabang extraordinary. Most ancient cities in Asia have been rebuilt, modernized, and developed beyond recognition. Luang Prabang was preserved partly by accident, by decades of poverty and isolation that prevented the development that destroys character. The result is a city that looks, in its historic core, almost exactly as it did 100 years ago. French colonial villas with shuttered windows and terracotta roofs sitting next to Lao temple compounds with their sweeping golden rooftops. Narrow streets shaded by frangipani trees. The Mekong visible at the end of almost every road. Walking through Luang Prabang's old town is one of the most visually complete experiences I have had anywhere in Asia. Let me take you through the city as I experienced it, because Luang Prabang reveals itself slowly and rewards patience. The monks' alms giving, the takbat, happens every morning at 5. I described the experience at the beginning of this video, and I want to add something to that description. The takbat is not a tourist attraction. It is a living religious practice that has continued in this city for centuries. Monks receive their daily food from lay people as an act of merit-making that is central to Theravada Buddhist practice. In recent years, as tourism has grown, the takbat has attracted crowds of visitors. Some come respectfully, observing quietly from a distance, as I did. Others have treated it as a photo opportunity, pressing close with cameras and flash, disrupting the procession, reducing a sacred practice to content. The Luang Prabang authorities have introduced guidelines for tourist behavior during the takbat. These guidelines exist because the disruption became serious enough to require intervention. This tension between the city's living culture and the tourism industry built around it is present everywhere in Luang Prabang. And it is getting more acute. But at 4:30 in the morning, before the tour groups arrive, before the street vendors set up, before the guest houses serve breakfast, the takbat is still what it has always been. Go early, go quietly, go with respect. Wat Xieng Thong is the temple I kept returning to. Built in 1560 by King Sethatharath, it sits at the northern tip of the peninsula where the Nam Khan meets the Mekong. The roof lines sweep down almost to the ground in the style unique to Luang Prabang temple architecture. A cascade of overlapping tiers that creates a silhouette unlike anything else in Southeast Asia. The rear wall of the Sim, the main sanctuary, is covered in a mosaic tree of life made from colored glass. At the right time of morning, when the light comes through the temple compound at a low angle, the mosaic catches the sun, and the whole wall seems to glow from within. I sat in the courtyard of Wat Xieng Thong for an hour on my second morning. Monks were going about their day. A novice swept the courtyard with a broom made of palm fronds. An older monk sat reading in the shade of a frangipani tree. Nobody asked me to leave. Nobody tried to sell me anything. Nobody suggested I buy incense or take a guided tour. I was simply allowed to be there. That quality, the simple permission to be present without transaction, is increasingly rare in Southeast Asian tourist sites. Luang Prabang still has it in most of its temples most of the time, but most of the time is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Kuang Si Falls is 30 kilometers south of the city. The road winds through mountains and villages, rice fields in the valley, banana palms on the slopes, children waving from the roadside. The falls themselves are extraordinary. Turquoise water cascading through 3 tiers of travertine pools, each a slightly different shade of blue-green, depending on the light and the season. The largest drop falls about 50 meters into a pool at the base that is wide enough to swim in. I arrived at 7 in the morning. Before the tour buses, the falls were almost empty. The sound of the water was the only sound. By 10, the place had transformed. Hundreds of visitors, music from someone's speaker, the pools crowded with people taking photographs. The difference between 7 in the morning and 10 in the morning at Kuang Si Falls is the difference between experiencing something and queuing to see something. Get there early. This advice applies to almost everything in Luang Prabang. The swimming in the lower pools is genuinely wonderful. The water is cold and clear. The light that comes through the forest canopy in the late morning turns the pools a color that photographs cannot fully capture. The walk up through the forest past the upper tiers is worth the 30 minutes it takes. Fewer people make the effort. The upper pools are calmer, more secluded, more likely to give you the sensation that you found something rather than that something was shown to you. The night market runs along the main street of the old town every evening from 5 until 10. Lao textiles, woven scarves, table runners, bags in indigo and rust and forest green. Silver jewelry. Paintings on mulberry paper, hand-carved wooden items. The craftsmanship is genuine. Much of it produced by the hill tribe communities in the surrounding mountains. The prices are low by any standard. A hand-woven scarf costs $3 to $5. A silk table runner costs $8 to $15. Silver earrings cost $2 to $4. The night market is one of the places in Luang Prabang where the tourist infrastructure and the local economy are most directly connected. The women selling textiles are, in many cases, from the villages that produced them. The money goes directly to the people who made the goods. It is not a perfect system. The commercialization of traditional crafts changes the crafts themselves over time. What sells to tourists shapes what gets made. But compared to the souvenir markets of Thailand or Vietnam, where most products are manufactured in factories and sold by people who had no connection to their production, Luang Prabang's night market has a directness and authenticity that is worth acknowledging. The food section of the market is less impressive. The buffet-style street food stalls that line one end of the market serve a version of Lao food that has been adjusted for Western palates. Less spice, more familiarity, higher prices than local restaurants. For actual Lao food, leave the market and walk one street back. The local restaurants serving khao nie, sticky rice, with lab, or a simple bowl of noodle soup cost a fraction of the market prices and taste significantly better. Let me talk about the Mekong, because no description of Luang Prabang is complete without it. The river runs along the western edge of the city. Wide, brown, powerful, it moves with a purpose and a slowness that are somehow both present at once. Boats cross it constantly, long-tail boats, slow wooden ferries, the occasional larger vessel carrying goods upstream. At sunset, the light on the Mekong turns everything orange and gold. The mountains on the far bank go dark slowly. The water catches the last of the light and holds it longer than the sky does. I watched that sunset from the riverbank on 3 consecutive evenings. I was not alone. The riverside fills with people at sunset, local and foreign alike, all drawn to the same light at the same hour. But even with people around, the Mekong at sunset in Luang Prabang creates a specific quality of stillness that I have not found in other cities. The river is bigger than any individual experience of it. Sitting beside it, watching it move, The city and its concerns feel appropriately small. Now let me tell you what is changing and why it matters. 2.1 million visitors came to Luang Prabang in 2025. That is an increase of over 80% from the previous year. For a UNESCO World Heritage city of 700 hectares, an area smaller than many university campuses, that number is extraordinary. The physical signs of this growth are visible everywhere in the city. New guest houses have appeared on streets that were residential 2 years ago. Construction noise, the sound of renovation and new building, is present throughout the old town at hours that make it difficult to ignore. The road from the airport into the city is lined with new hotels and resorts that did not exist 5 years ago. The character of the main tourist street, Sisavang Vong Road, has shifted. International coffee chains have appeared alongside the traditional Lao cafes. Prices in tourist-facing restaurants have risen noticeably. The vendors in the night market have become more aggressive in their approaches to passing travelers. None of these changes are dramatic on their own. Each one is small. The accumulation of them is not. There is also the barrage. 25 kilometers upstream on the Mekong, the Luang Prabang hydropower dam is under construction. A project worth $3 billion, it will create a reservoir that changes the river upstream of the city permanently. UNESCO has expressed concerns about the dam's potential impact on the heritage site, on the riverbanks, on the wetlands, on the visual integrity of the landscape that makes Luang Prabang what it is. The Lao government says the dam will not affect the city's UNESCO status. Former UNESCO officials have said the risk is real. The dam is already well under construction. It will be completed. What the Mekong looks like from Luang Prabang after the dam is operational is a question nobody can answer with certainty. But the river that exists today, the wide, brown, moving, powerful river I described watching at sunset, will not be exactly the same river after a dam changes the flow upstream. So what does all of this mean for you? If you are considering visiting Luang Prabang, go now. Not in 3 years, not after you have finished planning every other trip. Now, the tak bat at 5 in the morning, before the crowds arrive. The falls at 7, before the tour buses. The temples on a Tuesday morning, when the only other people there are monks going about their day. The sunset on the Mekong before the riverside fills with new development. These experiences are available today. They will become harder to find as the city develops. They may eventually become impossible to find in the form I experienced them. If you are considering Luang Prabang for a longer stay, for a month, for a season, for a retirement period, the case is strong. The cost of living is genuinely low. A decent guest house room costs $15 to $30 per night. A local meal costs $1 to $2. A tuk-tuk across the city costs $1 to $2. A month of comfortable living in Luang Prabang runs $500 to $700. The pace is slower than any other city I have visited in Southeast Asia. The city does not rush, it does not optimize itself for efficiency. It simply exists along its rivers, among its temples, in the rhythm of its monks, and its markets, and its extraordinary light. The internet is not fast by Vietnamese standards. The infrastructure is simpler than Thailand's. The healthcare options are limited. For anything serious, the nearest adequate facilities are in Vientiane or across the border in Thailand. These are real limitations. They matter. For a long stay, plan for them. But for the person who can accept them, who wants peace more than convenience, authenticity more than polish, beauty more than efficiency, Luang Prabang offers something that is becoming genuinely rare in Southeast Asia. A city that still feels like itself. I want to end where I began. That morning at 4:30, the monks in their saffron robes, the silent procession through the mist, the women kneeling with their baskets of rice. Before I left Luang Prabang, I went back for one more morning. The procession was the same. The silence was the same. The light was the same. But there were more tourists than the first time. Some with cameras held high, some speaking in normal conversational voices, some standing too close. The monks continued past, serene, undisturbed, as they have been for centuries. But I noticed the difference. Between the first morning and the last, 3 weeks apart, Luang Prabang is still the most peaceful city I have visited in Southeast Asia. For now. Go while that is still true. Thanks for watching. Have you been to Luang Prabang? Did it affect you the way it affected me? And if you are planning to go, drop your questions in the comments. I read every single one. See you in the next one. Let me go deeper on something that I think deserves more than a passing mention. The question of responsible tourism in Luang Prabang. Because visiting a place that is under pressure from tourism, knowing that your presence is part of what is changing it, creates a genuine ethical tension. And I think that tension is worth sitting with rather than dismissing. The standard response to this tension is to say that tourism brings economic benefits to local people, and that those benefits justify the cultural and environmental costs. This is sometimes true. In Luang Prabang, the night market, textiles, the guest house industry, the restaurant and transport economy, all of these provide income to Lao people that would not otherwise exist. But tourism's economic benefits are not distributed equally. The large hotels and tour operators that capture the majority of tourist spending are often not locally owned. The guest houses on the main tourist street charge prices that local families cannot afford to rent their own former homes. The development that follows mass tourism often displaces the communities whose presence made the place worth visiting in the first place. None of this means you should not go to Luang Prabang. It means you should think about how you go. Stay in locally owned guest houses rather than international hotel chains. Eat at local restaurants rather than tourist-facing establishments. Buy directly from the women selling textiles in the night market rather than from souvenir shops that may be reselling factory-made goods. Hire local guides and local transport. These choices do not solve the structural problems of mass tourism, but they shift the balance of who benefits from your visit in the direction of the people whose city you're in. And they tend to produce better travel experiences. The locally owned guest house will tell you things about the city that no international hotel concierge will know. The local restaurant will feed you food that tastes like Laos, rather than like approximation of what Laos thinks you want to eat. The local guide will show you things that do not appear on any tourist map. Travel well in Luang Prabang. It deserves it. One more thing about the peace. I used that word at the beginning of this video, and I want to explain what I actually mean by it. Because peace is easy to say and hard to describe specifically. Luang Prabang's peace is not the peace of emptiness. The city has people in it, markets, traffic, though less than any comparable Southeast Asian city. A nightlife of sorts, concentrated around a few bars near the Mekong. It is the peace of a city that operates at human scale. Everything in Luang Prabang is walkable. The old town from one end to the other takes 20 minutes. The temples around corners rather than across highways. The river is always close. The mountains are always visible. This physical scale, the sense that the city fits the human body rather than the automobile or the ambition of development, creates a relationship between a person and the place they are in that larger cities cannot produce. In Ho Chi Minh City, the city exceeds you. It is larger, faster, more complex than any individual can fully absorb. This is exciting for a visit and exhausting for a life. In Luang Prabang, the city meets you. It is sized for walking, for looking, for sitting by the river, for watching monks move through the morning mist. That sizing is what produces the peace, and it is what is most at risk as development continues. Every new hotel is a building that exceeds human scale. Every tour bus is a vehicle sized for throughput rather than presence. Every crowd at the falls or the temples is a mass that changes the relationship between individual and place. The peace of Luang Prabang is fragile not because it is delicate, but because it depends on a specific relationship between the city and the people in it. A relationship that tourism at sufficient scale inevitably disrupts. 2.1 million visitors in 2025, in a city of 700 hectares. The math is not sustainable. Which brings me back to where I keep ending up with this city. Go now, go quietly, go in a way that gives more than it takes, and go before the math catches up with the peace. A practical note for anyone planning the trip: the best time to visit Luang Prabang is October to March. The dry season, temperatures are warm but not oppressive. The skies are clear. The light that everyone photographs, that specific golden quality of the morning and evening light over the Mekong, is at its best in these months. April is Lao New Year. Pai Mai, which transforms the city with water festival celebrations that are genuinely extraordinary, but also brings significant crowds. May through September is the wet season. Rain is frequent, sometimes heavy. The Mekong rises significantly. The surrounding countryside turns intensely green. Crowds are lower and prices drop noticeably. For travelers who can handle the rain, the wet season Luang Prabang has a quality that the dry season cannot match. A lushness and a quiet that belongs entirely to the place rather than to the people passing through. Getting there is straightforward. Luang Prabang International Airport has direct connections to Bangkok, Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh City, Chiang Mai, Singapore and Kunming. Budget carriers keep prices manageable. A flight from Bangkok runs $40 to $90 depending on timing and airline. The slow boat from the Thai border town of why.I is the other option. A 2-day journey down the Mekong on a wooden boat, stopping overnight in Pak Ben. It is slow, occasionally uncomfortable, and one of the great travel experiences in Southeast Asia. If you have the time, take the boat. Arriving by boat rather than plane changes how you enter Luang Prabang. You have spent 2 days on the river that defines the city. You arrive the way people have been arriving for centuries. The city means something different when you come to it that way. Let me talk about the food, because Luang Prabang's cuisine is one of the least discussed and most underrated in Southeast Asia. Lao food shares DNA with Thai food. Both use fresh herbs, fish sauce, lime and sticky rice as foundations. But Lao cooking is less sweet, less complex in its spicing, and more focused on the quality of individual ingredients than on the layering of flavors. Lab is the dish I ate most often and the one I think about most often now. Minced meat, pork, chicken or fish, mixed with toasted rice powder, lime juice, fish sauce, fresh herbs, and dried chili. It is served at room temperature. The toasted rice powder adds a nutty texture that is unlike anything in Thai or Vietnamese cooking. It costs $1.50 at a local restaurant. Khao Nier. Sticky rice is the staple, not the jasmine rice of Thailand or the broken rice of Vietnam. Sticky rice, eaten with the hands, torn into small pieces and used to scoop up lab or dip into soups. The technique takes a few meals to learn. Once you have it, eating any other way in Laos feels slightly wrong. Mok pa is river fish steamed in banana leaf with lemongrass, galangal, and fresh dill. The dill is unexpected, a French colonial legacy apparently, and the combination is extraordinary. Available at any local restaurant for $2 to $3. The morning market, not the night market for tourists, but the actual morning market on the edge of the old town where local people buy their daily food, is one of the most interesting food experiences in the city. Riverfish still moving in buckets, wild mushrooms from the surrounding forest, bamboo shoots, herbs I could not identify, insects for those inclined. The morning market opens at 5 and is largely done by 7. Go early, go hungry. Eat something you cannot name. One final observation about Luang Prabang that I have not seen in any other travel content about the city: the quality of the light. I mentioned it briefly when talking about Wat Xieng Thong and the Mekong at sunset. But it deserves more than a brief mention because it is genuinely one of the things that makes Luang Prabang visually unlike anywhere else I have been. The city sits in a river valley surrounded by mountains. The mountains catch and filter the light in ways that are difficult to explain, but immediately apparent when you are there. In the early morning, before the sun clears the eastern ridge, the city is lit by a diffused, soft light that has no hard shadows. Colors are saturated but not harsh. The saffron of the monks' robes against the grey stone of the temple courtyards. The green of the frangipani leaves against the white of the colonial facades. In the late afternoon, the light comes from a low angle over the western mountains and turns everything it touches a deep gold. The Mekong catches it first, then the temple rooftops, then the streets, slowly as the sun drops. Photographers who visit Luang Prabang often describe it as one of the most photographable cities in the world. This is not about the architecture, or the monks, or the river individually. It is about the light that ties all of those elements together into something that looks, at the right hour, like a painting that got the colors exactly right. Wake up early, stay out late, watch the light change. It is free, it is extraordinary, and unlike almost everything else about Luang Prabang, it is not under threat from development or tourism or a dam upstream. The mountains will filter the light the same way for as long as the mountains stand. Everything else Go before it changes.